Over the last few years or decades of agriculture, plastic mulch has found its way into the production process. In fact, it's become pretty much a mainstay for many farmers. And along with its ubiquitous use in agriculture, there is some concern about what it may do to the environment or to human health. So in this video, I really kind of want to dive into this whole thing of plastic mulch. And I also want to share an alternative method that I've been experimenting with this season. First, when we are discussing plastic mulch, we want to understand why is it used in the first place. So first I want to note that both conventional and organic will use plastic mulch, especially in their use of growing higher value crops, right? Like the typical produce you see, like tomatoes, squash, and other cucurbits, peppers, and eggplant, different kinds of brassicas, onions, things of that nature. And so typically plastic mulch will be used as a weed suppressant. So it will inhibit certain types of weeds to germinate or their ability to grow through the plastic. There are some notable exceptions like chufa or nutgrass. There can also be certain types of weeds that can poke up through the holes where the plants are and really take over. An example of that might be like field bindweed or Canada thistle. But aside from those three tricky perennial weeds, the plastic mulch can be very effective to suppress a lot of other plants from growing. And so that saves a lot of time and a lot of labor for the farmer. Time does not have to be spent pulling up those weeds or stir-poing through them. Also, if someone is an organic grower, chemical pesticides like herbicides aren't really an option. So plastic mulch is a very enticing alternative for that. Also, plastic mulch can be used to help hold water in the soil. All right, so it helps to form a dome over top of the soil profile, preventing water from escaping, from evaporating, right, to a large degree. And so it helps to hold that water in the soil and make it available for growing plants. And also to keep that soil microbiome alive and healthy, to keep it from drying out and going dormant. So plastic mulch can come in a variety of colors, green, red, white, clear. Black is commonly used, and so depending on what color it is, it can vary in its effectiveness as an infrared sink, right? So black, of course, would be the most effective to be that infrared sink. So what do I mean by infrared sink? So the sun, when it shines, it of course sends out different wavelengths. We have ultraviolet spectrum, we have visible light, and we have infrared, and things of that nature. So basically infrared is the heat energy. So if you touch something black outside, like maybe if you're wearing a black shirt, or if the interior of a car, maybe the seat is black and you sit down in it and it's really hot, that's because it's holding all that infrared energy that it's absorbed from the sun. So while other forms of light we can either see with the visible light, or we can feel its effects, like maybe a sunburn or something of that nature, the infrared spectrum of light is really more based on, at least as far as human sight is concerned, is really based on the perception of heat. And so infrared light, or this heat energy, can be really beneficial to a lot of plants and help to facilitate their growth and different biochemical processes that occur within these plants. And so plastic mulches, especially black plastic mulches, will absorb this heat and they will hold it in the soil, and plant roots can be exposed to this. Also, some of that heat might be radiated up, and the growing above ground part of a plant can also may also benefit from it. And so the fact that it's an infrared sink can also relate to season extension, right? Just because it's heating up that soil, it's holding in more of that heat. So that growing season may last an extra few days or a couple of weeks because that soil is functioning at a warmer temperature for a longer range throughout that year. Season extension, it can also work the other way too. If you're using a different color of plastic, like white plastic, on different kinds of brassicas, which are usually a cool season crop, you might be able to use this white plastic to grow brassicas further into the summer, right? Because that white plastic is not absorbing that heat, right? It's not a heat sink, it's reflecting that heat. So it's actually cooling down the soil and making the growing conditions more conducive to brassicas like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage during the warmer part of the year. So also soil CO2 production may also increase. This is because the soil is being warmed earlier in the year and it's staying warmer later on into the year. Also, in certain conditions, it may be helping to maintain a more stable soil environment, which is conducive to microbial growth. And when you get a lot more microbial growth, you get more microbial respiration, which is the breakdown of organic matter into CO2, which is then released and is able to be absorbed and used by growing plants. So the increase in soil CO2 production is a result of the increased microbial soil activity. In some cases, the plastic mulch can also be a habitat for extremophile habitat, right? So certain soil microorganisms that don't really get a lot of attention are archaeans, right? And these are very unique class of microorganism, right? Unlike fungi and unlike bacteria, these archaeans are able to exist and thrive in very extreme environments, right? Maybe like down in the ocean where it's extremely dark and, you know, very salty, close to the floor, or in certain areas where it is extremely hot. So these extremophiles, like the archaeans, have adapted different ways, different mechanisms to survive and thrive in those particular climates. Now, a lot of archaeans in lesser numbers also occur in a lot of our soils as well, but the number of archaeans may actually increase with plastic mulch, for example, because it creates, or it has the potential to create, especially with like being that infrared sink, to create a hotter environment in the soil. So you may have more archaeans thriving during a particular time of the year under those specific conditions, while you might not have as much robust fungal or bacterial growth in certain cases. But the archaeans are important. They're good for a lot of plant growth. Certain archaeans can help with the nitrification of soil. They can help to solubilize phosphorus in the soil as well. And then they, you know, may also reduce sulfur. They may also produce compounds like metabolites or plant hormones in certain cases that are picked up and used by the plants. So there can be some benefits there. Now we can talk about some of the cons, some of the bad side of the plastic mulch, right? Some of the potential concerns. The synthetic non-biodegradable plastic is made from petroleum, right? So there can be a lot of environmental concerns, both in the production process of this plastic and then also the materials that this plastic is made of, being the petroleum or petroleum byproducts. And then it's not biodegradable, so it's going to slowly break down in the soil, or it's going to end up in a landfill, and it can release microplastics, which we'll talk about in a minute. Right, again, this synthetic plastic mulch is not reusable, so once you're done using it, it's commonly just tossed in the trash. Right? There's usually soil particulate matter clinging to it, and so it's not going to be recyclable, it's not going to be biodegradable, and it's not going to be reusable, right? Especially because it can tear in different places. We also have the macroplastics concern, right? So if there are any tears or loose pieces of plastic, whether it's you know, really windy out in the field, or when picking up that plastic, the little pieces may tear off and, you know, stay in the field or in the soil. And these macroplastics can blow off right into woodlands, into fields, into the environment, and may be ingested by certain types of animals. And so they may cause issues in that respect. And then also we have the microplastics. Macroplastics can over time shed microplastics, and these microplastics are so small, some of them, if ingested by a human or an animal, they can remain in these organisms for long periods of time, right? They can be endocrine disruptors. They may find their way up into the brain. They may be mutagenic, and what I mean by that is carcinogenic. They may also inhibit microbial growth, not just in the soil, but also in our bodies. You look at the internal microflora, so there may be some issues there as well. And then these microplastics can bioaccumulate in the soil, in the environment, in water, in organisms. So they bioaccumulate over years, over decades, because for instance, for the humans, our bodies don't really have a method to break down the plastics into harmless compounds that the body can get rid of. We don't really have any enzymes that can do that. So these bioplastics tend to bioaccumulate in many respects, and may take a long time to filter their way out of the body. And then also another con of plastic mulch can be that it can increase surface water runoff, right? Because the plastic is non-permeable, right? There are some sporadic holes where growing plants are, but the vast majority of that area is impermeable surface area, where the water, when it hits, it will run off the sides of the plastic, so it may cause some erosion challenges, right? Not as much water from rainfall is being able to work its way down into the soil profile. Now there is a biodegradable option where a lot of these biodegradable plastic mulches are made out of cornstarch or things like that. And so I have a big question mark here, because it's largely kind of unknown, right? As to if the biodegradable plastics are that much safer than the synthetic ones. So the biodegradable plastics, of course, are probably going to be grown by conventional GMO corn that is doused in various chemicals like glyphosate and synthetic fertilizers and all that. So you have the environmental impacts of that, right, of that corn that's being grown to produce this bioplastic. So is that really sustainable? I tend to think not. And then you also have some of the chemical binding agents, right? Some of the adherents. So you have the cornstarch, but to help hold it together, to help create that plastic, you also have some of these chemical binding agents, some of which may be synthetic, some of which may be toxic and may cause issues in the soil health or even to human health. But a lot of research is unclear about that at this phase, because a lot of these biodegradable plastics are relatively new. So there's not a whole lot of research that's available out there yet to really understand how effective these are and how safe they are. Also, there's the concern of the biodegradable plastics not lasting long enough for certain crops, right? Especially, like, for example, if growing a crop like strawberries, which are perennial, the biodegradable plastic is probably only going to last a few months, you know, whereas the strawberries, you may grow them for a few years, 4 or 5 years even, and the biodegradable plastic mulch is going to be gone long before that. Also, commonly, this biodegradable option will actually be tilled back into the soil so that the microbes can break it down. And it's kind of unclear, as these bioplastics degrade and break down in the soil, there may be some conflicting evidence out there as to if this actually may inhibit the microbial growth or if it doesn't negatively affect it. So now I want to focus on what I'm using as an experimental solution, what I'm kind of trialing as a potential alternative. And so in order to really focus on these benefits, how can I get a lot of these benefits from other sources, right? So this is kind of what the whole focus is for me. So if I increase my organic matter in the soil by means of using a cover crop when I'm not growing a food crop, right, and that will help to increase organic matter, right? I can also apply compost. I can also apply mulches like grass clippings or you know, chop and drop of like different, you know, weeds or, you know, whatever. And so that can really help to increase soil organic matter, right? Getting living roots in the soil as much as possible, having good soil coverage. And so we want to build up this organic matter because it creates a really good habitat for a lot of different microbes and fungi, and it can help with soil structure, enabling it to breathe. And it also enables the soil to hold onto water, right, like a sponge. The grass mulch, or some other form of mulch, maybe a organic based mulch, this is really useful for weed suppression. Also, in particular with certain types of leaves, or with grass mulch, if it's fresh and then it gets watered, that can also be an additional source of nitrogen that can work its way down into the soil and be absorbed by plants. And this mulch, the grass mulch or some leaf mulches or whatever, is also very biodegradable. Now, I'm also experimenting with using rocks, right, that maybe I dig up in the garden, or I find lying around, with putting these around some of the plants, like the pepper plants, because some of these rocks can hold on to infrared heat, right? They can be an infrared sink to some degree. You can touch them and those rocks will feel warm, so that's a good indication that they will help to collect some of that heat. So I'm experimenting with putting them around certain plants so that they can hopefully kind of hold on to the heat, and maybe see if they can help the plants grow a little bit better, maybe by reflecting that heat back towards the plant, or down into the soil. Also, potentially, especially if you're not using a mulch like the grass mulch, the cultivating soil somewhat, maybe if you're going through to cultivate out weeds or whatever it may be, that relatively shallow soil disturbance may also help to loosen up some of the soil if that's what's needed, but also it can help to stir things up a little bit, and it can really reinvigorate certain types of soil bacteria that can break down some of that organic matter and create more CO2 as well that might be picked up by plants. So it may help plants to grow in that way as well. I'm not totally sure, but even just making the soil more breathable, looser, can be really good for plant roots as well, especially if the soil that they're growing in has compaction issues. So a short-term solution to this would be cultivation, right? Long-term solution would be to boost the organic matter, like I mentioned earlier. Another thing I'm experimenting with this is, usually people will also use drip tape along with these plastic mulches, or without the plastic mulches, right? But this drip tape is often plastic as well. So I'm kind of experimenting with a smaller scale irrigation system, and it's not, I don't have it up here, but basically what I'm using is upturned glass bottles, right? And I'll stuff like the opening full of grasses or whatever, so it takes a while for that water to filter out of the glass, and I will partially bury them a little bit into the soil so that water is going through into the soil profile, and it's not running off the top, the surface all at once. It's not puddling up, but I have a nice controlled kind of drip or stream that's working its way into the soil profile, and it's able to percolate deeper down into the soil profile as well. So it's kind of based off of the concept of an Oya. However, it is very much not an Oya, right? Because it doesn't sweat and it's releasing the water faster than an Oya would. However, I've still had these glass bottles irrigate the soil. Like I had one drip for over 2 hours before it emptied out. So that's, that's a pretty good length of time for the water to go into the soil. Also, I just wanted to quickly note another con of plastic mulches, right? So I mentioned plastic mulches as being a weed suppressant, right? Which is actually, I put up there as a good thing, but it can also kind of be seen as somewhat of a negative, and potentially a very substantial negative. So the plastic mulch doesn't really enable me to go through a bed and pick out what weeds I want to keep and which ones I don't want to keep. So why would I want to keep certain weeds? Well, because certain weeds, certain of these wild plants, are very beneficial and in some cases, many cases, necessary. They're needed by beneficial insects, whether for the nectar or the extrafloral nectaries or just shelter and habitat for a lot of these beneficial insects. And I'm not just talking about pollinators, I'm talking about predators as well, right? Insect predators, right? You're talking about the syrphid flies or the tachinid flies, the predatory wasps, parasitic wasps, some of the beneficial beetles, lightning bugs, either the nocturnal or the diurnal lightning bugs will feed off of pollen in their adult phases. So if you lose a lot of those weeds, then you lose a lot of that food source and a lot of that habitat for these beneficial insects. And so you could end up with having more pest issues like aphids or certain types of worms or caterpillars, because there's less habitat for them that would be conducive to their growth and their livelihood. Because what I do in my garden is I don't go through and weed out everything. I don't try to suppress all weeds, right? I try to keep some around for a little bit of shade or their unique attributes. You know, maybe they produce flowers that are really good for different types of pollinators and predators. Maybe they help facilitate the fixation of nitrogen. Maybe they help to break up soil compaction. A lot of different reasons to keep various types of weed species in the garden along with your plants. Alright, so thank you so much for checking out this video on plastic mulch. You are kind of left to your own devices at this point if plastic mulch is right for you, if that's something you want to use in the future or not. But if you have any opinions on this one way or the other, or if you have experiences with using plastic mulch or different alternatives, definitely feel free to let us know in the comments. And on that note, thank you again so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.